Today, on the official Marvel podcast, we're taking you behind the scenes of Marvel Television's Daredevil Born Again Season 2 with directors of photography Hilary Spera and Jeffrey Waldron.
I remember calling Hilary and just being like, hey, I'm so excited to join. I can't wait to jump in. And you're like, yeah, we're doing this big boat on the East River. I'm like, what are you talking about?
We'll also hear from production designer Michael Shaw about his role in developing the overall aesthetic for Season 2.
These sequences, all the fight sequences, are always really fun because you end up realizing that your set has to do certain things that go beyond just look great and convey the characters and the intention of the story.
I'm Quinn Lamar.
I'm Anthony Carboni.
And this is the official Marvel podcast.
We're a little past the halfway mark of Daredevil Born Again Season 2, and things are really heating up in Hell's Kitchen. Quinn, what do you think so far? How are you feeling about the season?
Honestly, I cannot stop thinking about that scene with Bullseye in the diner from episode 4.
Yes.
And I loved seeing new scenes with Foggy in the last episode. But man, Vanessa, though, I'm not going to spoil anything, but that was insane.
Right? I can't believe it. And agreed on that Bullseye diner scene. I don't think I'm ever going to look at a lobster the same way again. What a way to go out, though. Wow. If you're curious about how they filmed that scene or any of the incredible moments so far this season, I actually got to learn all about it with directors of photography Hilary Spera and Jeffrey Waldron. Take a listen. Thank you both for being here. What an exciting thing to be working on, especially a season that opens with such an intense action sequence, right? We've got this opening sequence with a cargo ship on the East River. This feels like it was a very intense process. Can you talk about how you work on something that's such a huge set piece and how you figure out how to shoot that?
Yeah, totally. It was definitely intimidating to read that in the scripts kind of coming back from season 1. And this was the first thing up. And the plan was to shoot this sequence all on location. We shot this boat on the East River between Brooklyn and Manhattan.
Wow.
Yeah. And so that, the top of the boat is all practically shot on location on the river. And then the cargo hold itself down below is a set that Michael Shaw, our production designer, built, which is incredible. So we had the challenge of marrying the two locations. And then, obviously the big beast was shooting on the deck of the ship. And we had wind to contend with. We had all kinds of weather. We had the tides. We had the fact that the river is its own sort of beast. And then also from a lighting perspective, it was such a challenge because we could really only light from one side of the ship because we're trying to feature, seeing the bridge in the background and the river and then also Manhattan. So we employed lighting drones and, the choreography of working with the drones and kind of keeping it all as a backlight as Charlie, as Daredevil is moving around, Anyway, it's just a lot of fun challenges in one sequence that I think we didn't really realize until we were in it.
I'm sorry. This is the first time I've ever heard the phrase lighting drones. And man, that's got to be such a bonkers thing to keep running. You got the ship going down the river. You've got the drones trying to keep up with the ship. Wow, what an intense sequence.
Yeah, for me, I'd never actually used them before. They'd been this mythological creature I'd always heard about and never actually used. And our gaffer, Charlie Grubbs, was really adamant that this was the best way to do it. And he was right. But the interesting challenge was, I think they only fly for 13 minutes or something with the light that we had on it, which was an LED source that we're controlling, from the ground. But we had to time the movement of the drones to be consistent with Charlie's choreography and the choreography of the stunts so that, the light didn't go one way and they went the other way. So it was a really interesting, as most of the sequences are in our show, fortunately, just a lot of moving parts and a lot of coordination and collaboration. And, you just really have to nail it in prep. Otherwise, you're there literally uh-oh, what do we do now? If one thing goes wrong. So yeah, it was fun.
Wow. Hilary, you were on season 1, but Jeffrey, you came on for season 2 and coming on for season 2 and seeing this sequence as the first thing must have been really intense.
Absolutely nuts. Yeah. I remember calling Hilary and just being like, hey, I'm so excited to join. I can't wait to jump in. And you're like, yeah, we're doing this big boat on the East River. I'm like, what are you talking about? And you were at that point like, I don't know how we're going to do this.
Yeah.
And then it was a great introduction to, Daredevil season 2, where it just like kept being some of the biggest, most explosive, interesting, fun visual worlds. But yeah, it was definitely a moment of like, oh, wow, what am I getting into here?
One of the things that I love is that you have given a lot of style to each character in a way. Like, obviously, the show has its own visual style, but then when you look at characters that sort of get a bit more spotlight this season, like Bullseye, when you're coming up with sort of the visual language, what did you want to accomplish visually when you're showing the story of those characters?
Yeah, I mean, I'll speak to Bullseye a little bit. We got to put together a really fun sequence that sort of expands his character visually and also just
Yeah.
gives kind of a glimpse into sort of the mind of this very strange, sort of contradictory dude who's very precise, very dangerous, and has this also kind of like childlike, carefree personality about it all. So we got to do this sort of day in the life where we embrace a lot of sort of the center punch precision of how he's, always sort of viewed through a scope in the first season, but also just start to bring in some interesting diagonals, bring in a little bit of warmth to his like super cold, sort of calculated world, because he's got this sort of strange milkshake drinking, childlike playfulness that I think was kind of fun to expand into. And I think, the last shot of that sequence is a good sort of amalgamation of the things we were trying to bring in to expand him visually. It's that shot where it's just like starts on the results of his carnage. It's just dead bodies, and we pull back over this puddle where we reveal like a live lobster on the loose from the lobster cage. And then, we come up and see that he's like made the bullseye in ketchup and has left the place. And then it was just very lucky that like a New York bus had pulled up with the I Love New York logo on it. And so like on set, we played that back with that Billy Joel song, and we were just like, what? Yeah.
Wait, the bus was not a planned part of it?
No, it was just a bus. It was one of those happy accidents, and it did end up in there.
That's amazing. Especially because I would imagine, a sequence like that is got to be multiple days and multiple teams working together, figuring it out. I mean, like,
absolutely.
You must have worked a lot with stunt coordinators and things like that on this one too, yeah?
Definitely. So that's a scene where we got in there and we sort of built the language of what this diner and what his sort of interaction with it would be. There's sort of those shots from him looking around at the various things that we know as bullseye lovers that he's going to use as weapons later. And we kind of cue it up. And then the next day, stunt team came in to really get into the nitty gritty of the action. And then we pick it up actually at the end again to bring some of the more storytelling elements and sort of put a bookend on it.
When you're doing things like showing Bullseye kind of taking stock of the environment, seeing things that he can use as weapons, what's sort of the visual trick to showing him taking that inventory without giving too much away or being too on the nose?
I think a couple of them are there to be almost on the nose, so the other ones you take in a little less obviously. So like we have a shot where, he's kind of at his little perch on the counter there, and then we jump the camera behind, a set of knife and fork on a napkin, and we do a little rack, and he does a little knowing like, this is going to be useful, and he does it again on the other side. There's also a couple other plants that are designed to not be obvious, including that there are lobsters there, that there are, that all these other things that will become weapons are there before he suddenly has them in his hand or has stuck them in someone's eye or whatever.
What's the trick to working with a lobster?
They get very good treatment, but yeah, they also couldn't be in the water next to the fake lobsters, which we also use. So there were like hidden dividers. There's quite a lot that goes into shooting a lobster.
That is fascinating. Okay. I want to back up to, there's another action sequence in episode 2 where the task force barges into Matt and Karen's apartment while they're dancing. Let's talk a little bit about the process of that, which starts as a very tranquil, sweet scene and then descends into classic Daredevil intensity.
Yeah, that was another one that took a lot of coordination between obviously stunts, but also lighting and set building and everything. I mean, knowing that that big sequence was going to happen in that small space of the attic space, which was a set that we built, we were really considering what we needed for the physicality of what that would be. But the way that we sort of lived with Matt and Karen and the fact that they are kind of hunkered down together and they have this relationship, and we wanted it to be more warm and intimate, and like how Fisk's world is always colder and a lot more controlled compositionally, like it's usually like a lockdown camera or camera on dolly. The world of Matt and Karen is handheld, it's longer lenses, it wants to feel just a lot more intimate and human. And so we were really in that space with warm lighting and sort of feeling just kind of their closeness. And then when the task force arrives, it really just like abruptly interrupts it. And so kind of used that through lighting as well, like showing kind of like the harsher, whiter, harder sources of the task force headlights and vehicles that they use. And then also having Matt's sensory be an element of that as well. Like he's really distracted and disrupted by the sound of their vehicles arriving and like a sound that they use to sort of disrupt and disarm him. So it was an interesting culmination of what we did in season 1 and what we were able to do, kind of showing the visuals of the show in season 2 moving forward. It was also just fun sequence. But again, it's intimidating to know that like this is what you're walking into when you start the season, so.
Yeah. Something else that I feel like we absolutely have to talk about. This is a show that has a reputation for some very intense oneers. And I feel like there's got to be some pressure and also some fun involved with figuring out how you're going to top that every season. I want to talk about Daredevil and Swordsman breaking out of the detention center, how y'all planned that sequence, and why was this one the oneer for the season when there's, we obviously been talking about there's so many big set pieces this season.
Yeah, I was in a lot of meetings where it was kind of like, is this the oneer? Is this the oneer? And then people were a little nervous to jump into a giant oneer, actually. They didn't know where it was going to land. And then this sequence came together and it's like, could this be? It's a lot of real estate. There's a lot of different parts of a set that we need to build to connect. There's a ton of characters in it. So once it was like, that's going to be it, it was then like, how do we make this work? How do we light this space in a way that we're not going to be able to shift things around and sweeten things shot to shot? How do we build these sets that we can move from one room to another? How does Matt sense something through this wall while we're not cutting? How do we tell the audience all these things they need to know and have this sort of fluid, very close and wide, taking the audience truly on this ride? And, a lot of it is Phil Silvera's design of this. A lot of the sequences are very exciting because they cut. They have a rhythmic quality. You're jumping the audience around up here, people getting pulled down and stuff. This one didn't have that luxury, so it had to be paced within the shot. And it is a very fast-paced oneer. I mean, we're ripping through, people are running down hallways. There's a lot going on and it's very dense, and a lot of that is him. So it's like me trying to make sure we're designing and lighting a set that is a playground for him where kind of anything can go, and then him being so smart about how he's hiding rigs and pulls and flying and baton effects and all this kind of stuff that he usually can hide in cuts. It's quite an undertaking.
Amazing. Well, y'all, the show looks beautiful. It's such a wonderful series. Hilary Spera, Jeffrey Waldron, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Joe.
So while you were talking with Hilary Spera and Jeffrey Waldron, I reached out to production designer Michael Shaw to get some more, behind the scenes info on Daredevil Born Again Season 2.
Nice. Please tell me you asked about the Rise and Grind motivational poster in Daniel's office, because I need to get my hands on that poster.
Well, sort of, but what really stood out to me in your conversation with Hilary and Jeffrey was the bit about the visual contrast between Matt Murdock's warm, intimate world and Wilson Fisk's cold and much more controlled environments. That's the theme I continue to dig into with Michael. Check it out. We are joined now with Michael Shaw, production designer for Daredevil Born Again, Seasons 1, 2, and currently working on Season 3, correct?
That is correct.
Now, the new season, Daredevil Born Again Season 2, when you were developing Matt Murdock's world, with, Wilson Fisk, what themes did you use to contrast those two very different worlds?
Well, the theme of the season is that Wilson has taken over New York. He's the mayor, and he is a rather authoritarian figure. City Hall and Gracie Mansion are a pair, and they're very ornate. In the first season, we made a point to make him feel very out of place there, and that it's not really his environment. He moves into Gracie Mansion, he moves into City Hall. There have been many mayors before him in both of those places. So for him, he never really felt at home there. And we spent a lot of time making those environments feel uncomfortable, where the furniture was a little bit stiff, the chairs a little bit tight. He doesn't quite fit there.
Yeah.
But the bunkers, the detention center, his lair, all of those places, that's more his where he exists. And, we kind of dialed in a sort of World War II fascist regime versus an anti fascist rebel group, fighting each other. And so we used for like Wilson's World a lot of references of World War II fortified bunkers, which is really what I modeled the detention center after, and the conference room in the detention center.
Hmm.
World War II bunkers that have small windows for artillery, and feeling like they're impenetrable, contrasting to Matt's world, which is the rebel resistance, the attic set. Matt is always above things. So wherever he is in his apartment, on the rooftop, in this case, he's at the top of a building, hidden in an attic that to get to, you go through Josie's and you go through another building, through a hole in the wall. So that's the contrast. It's wood, it's textural, it's sort of romantic versus like this really dark, hard, rough material.
And another office that stands out is Daniel Blake's office
Yeah, Daniel's is super fun.
with the like grind and hustle,
Yeah.
motivation posters. And what can you tell us about designing that space and how it reflects to like Daniel's personality?
Well, he's a kind of funny character, and I wanted there to be a little humor in there,
Mhm.
and to feel like as much as Fisk gave him this great apartment as a carrot, his office is a little bit of a stick, you know?
Mhm.
And it's like you get an office in the basement of City Hall that's kind of at the end of a corridor that looks out onto an alleyway that really doesn't get a lot of natural light. And to top it off, there's this great column in the front of his desk that is in the way of everything. And we made the column movable. So you could really place it to camera and make sure that it was in the way. It's the worst office in the place when it's the column in front of the desk.
And speaking of Daniel's apartment, it doesn't really feel like it's lived in and
Yeah.
as homey as Matt and Karen's like hideout.
Well, it's not really his place. And it's a place that he's been given temporarily. And he doesn't really have much.
Right. But I want to go back to something you brought up earlier. Episode 3 features an action packed one shot sequence featuring Daredevil and the Swordsman fighting to break out of the task force detention center.
Right.
How did you collaborate with the wider team to build out that space?
Well, there's always collaboration, and the fight sequence was very important. One of the things, we establish the sort of first version of the detention center at the end of the first season. So we knew what that needed to be, and we wanted it to feel a little bit epic. Like when we first reveal what that space is, you're in the conference room with Swordsman, and you go through the window, and then you're in the space and you see, oh, what he's doing, what Fisk is doing is rounding up people off the streets, the people he doesn't want to listen to, all these rebels. He's putting them in cages, and the fight sequence, which is beautiful, it was almost like watching ballet. I mean, it was just beautifully choreographed. We designed the space and they kind of choreographed everything around it. And then we talked about there should be a pipe that breaks, there should be something that swordsman can take off one of the cages and use as a sword. It was really them working within the space. At one point, we moved all the cages in a foot because they wanted a tighter alleyway to fight in. But these sequences, all the fight sequences, are always really fun because you end up realizing that your set has to do certain things that go beyond just look great and convey the characters and the intention of the story.
Now, there's a scene where Fisk is involved in a boxing match at Fogwell's gym. What did you need to communicate in the design of that space?
Well, this is not the original Fogwells. This is a specific match that's in an event space. But we wanted the event space to feel like Fogwell's. And so everyone was very conscientious about creating something which was an homage to Fogwell's. We looked for a good sized warehouse that was on street level, that's brick, that we could install that iconic wall of amber windows that had the Fogwells on the outside. And so we built that wall and installed the boxing ring and tried to make it feel as close to Fogwells as possible. And I think we did pretty well.
I believe so too. That kind of leads to another question with all these like really different spaces and they're conveying all these different messages about the characters. How do you ensure that like all of these different spaces across New York City, that they feel like cohesive and part of the same universe?
Well, one of the things that we do in this show from the very beginning was to create a highly grounded, realistic world to play everything against. And we felt like if you create a world that's super real and New York, whatever happens that's a kind of superhero moment is in a way more believable. So that was something that we're really conscientious of, is making sure that we're not creating a comic book world, we're creating a real, authentic New York. And shooting in New York was pivotal in that.
Yeah. Before I let you go, I want to ask you, is there a set or prop that you are especially proud of, one that perhaps might be overlooked?
I really enjoyed Vanessa's hospital room, which is, that was a set because of what happens. We wanted it to feel very, very special and ethereal and dreamlike and not just a typical hospital room, because we have all these other hospital rooms we built. So I wanted it to feel like you're going into kind of a shell. And because there's also all these scenes where they're going to the water, to the ocean, that they're standing on the beach. So we made a very curvy set and very feminine set. So that was a really fun, unique set for us.
Thank you very much for sitting down with us, Michael Shaw, production designer for Daredevil Born Again. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
While Matt Murdock's off protecting Hell's Kitchen, another Marvel superhero is left fighting his own demons in the monstrous comic book series Infernal Hulk. Throughout his publishing history, Bruce Banner's alter ego has taken on several different identities, each with its own unique personality. Most recently, writer Chris Condon praised the Hulk's newest evolution, going from incredible to immortal to now the Infernal Hulk. In his latest adventures, written by Philip Kennedy Johnson, with art by Nick Klein, the Hulk faces an ancient evil known as Eldis, resulting in a truly terrifying transformation. But it's this chilling horror that has writer Chris Condon eager for more.
It is just a crazy, wonderful horror book for the ages, and I love it that it's a Hulk book, because a Hulk book is never the same thing twice, and this is truly a unique take, and I'm just seeing it spin out of what Al Ewing had done in Immortal Hulk, and sort of growing upon that, and just keep pushing it into doing new and interesting things. And it's wonderful. The Nick Klein art is awesome, and I just love this terrifying image of the Hulk with a split down the center of him. It's really cool.
You can experience the frightful transformation for yourself by picking up Infernal Hulk at your local comic book shop today.
Next week on the official Marvel podcast, we round up the Spider Heroes and take a peek at the brand new limited series Amazing Spider-Man Spider-Versity with co-writers Jordan Morris and Joe Kelly.
There's so many great spider heroes, and if you do already love these characters, I mean, what comics reader doesn't love a team-up? It's really fun to see them come together.
Until then, be sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen, drop a comment, give us those 5 stars, and tell a friend about us.
This episode of the official Marvel podcast was hosted by Quinn Lamar and me, Anthony Carboni.
Our producers are Jasmine Estrada and Anita Flores.
Brad Barton is our senior manager of audio production and development, and our production manager is Emily Godfrey.
Mixed by Ry Dorsey.
Our theme music is by Ida Akbal.
Executive produced by Larissa Rosen.
Thanks for listening.